gosh. And where is everybody? There is no one.
Chaos and mayhem. All right. I apologize. I am 3 minutes late. My day has been extremely strange, and so I sat down in the other room and did not realize it was 5 o'clock already. So, yeah, there's going to be plenty of seats tonight. Three of you guys are getting ready for your check rides still.
I'm going to get my far in.
You'll get your far in. Good. So, yeah, if you have a copy of the far in with you, they'll be handy tonight.
Okay. I assume electronic is acceptable.
Absolutely. I have zero judgment about which one. So I don't actually have any corrections to make from last week. Nobody has brought up anything that I just. Of course, you weren't here.
I was listening, actually. I did a stream.
Did it work?
Yeah, we're great. I could hear it really well, and the slides showed up. You know, everything was great, yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm a huge fan of the digital FAR-Aim, and I have since learned that the printed copies don't always have all the regulations you want anyway. And then the app one that I use from ASA, it's keyword searchable, and it's updated automatically for life.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's cool.
now I don't know how Perry feels about a digital FAR-Aim, and like getting ready for a check ride, I would suggest buying a current FAR-Aim. That is so pretty.
I love this thing now.
See?
My best friend.
There we go.
I thought, so when I bought this, I thought it came with all these stickers, and it just came with the stickers, and I was like, oh, and then I had to do it myself.
Which
Which is just horrible.
Looks good, though. Yeah.
Things like
This
that.
is what mine looked like from a checker.
Yeah. That's what mine was like a day ago.
So,
That is awesome.
It's
Yeah.
cool. It's cool.
like I said, if you're going to take a check ride, at least bring a current FAR-Aim. 2024 for this year. Don't come in with a 2023. They do make changes, and they almost invariably the question you get will be a change. You know, they'll rabbit hole you on that. All right.
Like the registration.
So tonight is all about FARs, really. And we're just going to kind of jump into it because I don't know why you're not. There we go.
Oh, man, big turnout tonight, huh?
Yeah.
See you guys later.
3 of you.
Yeah.
All right. So FAR Part 61, otherwise known as
How to get your license.
how to make a pilot. All right. So it's pilot and other crew members, but when you're, especially on the writtens and on your orals, if the question is about what are the requirements to become a X, you're looking for Part 61. All right. So on your written test, it helps you for narrowing it down pretty quickly because you're going to go into that. So Part 61.3 is requirements for certificates, ratings, and authorization. Never heard of a question that specifically comes out about Part 3, but Part 3 has a little bit in it that talks about what you need for a pilot certificate, what you need for a medical certificate or basic med, and that you have to have a copy of your photo ID to make any of those certificates valid, which is kind of the weird little hook there. Not something I would expect a big question to come up about, but it also, I want you to understand how the aims are organized. Does anybody know what Part 1 is?
Definitions.
So definitions. If they ask you what something means, look at Part 1 first. All right. And my slides are specifically in numerical order of the parts, which doesn't always make it the best way to study the FAR. What we're going to do is I'm going to go through all these parts that are important, And Josh has actually really got kind of an advantage on you guys because we've been hammering on these for a couple of weeks as he's getting ready for his check writing. But then when we get to the end, I'm going to tell you about a resource that I have. And if you guys want it, I will figure out a way to get it to you for studying where they're grouped in a way that makes better sense. Okay? I can't just hang it because it's a commercial product and I don't want to violate copyright. All right. So, does anybody know what 6123 covers?
Medical certificates and requirements and duration.
Okay. So, all those questions about how long is your medical certificate valid for, blah, blah, blah. If it's on an oral, I suggest you turn to 6123, have it open. You should know the answers, especially for you. All right? Like, I know specifically that I get a Class 2 medical every time I go get a medical. My Class 2s are unusual because I have a special issuance. So my Class 2 is only valid for a year, and then it is not valid for any other class after that. But a normal Class 2 certificate would be valid for a year, and then
5 years is that.
if you're under the age of 40. So I'd have to go look, honestly, because I think it's 2 years total for if you're over the age of 40.
Yeah.
Class 3 is only good for 24 months, 24 months.
Yeah.
If you're over the age of 40, right? I don't know that off the top of my head anymore because mine are only good for a year because I have special issues.
And then I don't know if it's over 40 when it was issued or over 40 when the day you're asking the question, right?
So you go look in 23, and that's only a problem for you once in your life. But what I'm going to tell you is, if it's a regulation like that, 100% you should know the answer for you. All right, for the oral. For the written test, you got to know it for everybody. The good news is that you can kind of study it as a table. I bring up 2123 because C3 Basic Med is in there, and it never once calls it Basic Med. All right? So what I want you to know is that if you look at FAR 6123 and you go to C3, it lays out that to use Basic Med, you have to have a driver's license. It cannot just be an ID, it has to be a driver's license. And you have to comply with any restrictions on that driver's license. What does that mean?
As in eyesight restrictions, maybe?
If it says you have to wear glasses, you have to wear glasses. If it says that you have to take a certain medication, I don't know.
Can't drive at night.
Can't drive at night, you have to comply with all those restrictions. All right? You have to have held a medical certificate after, I've got a typo, after 14 July 2006. You have to, for most people now, what this means is you have to have had at least a Class 3 medical at one point in your life. All right? For us older guys that have been doing this for a while, you had to have had at least a Class 3 medical issued by the FAA after 14 July 2006. And then you can use Basic Med. All right? You have to have you have to do a medical education course. Almost everybody does AOPA's course because it's free. And it was the first one built.
Where can you do that?
What's that? Online.
Oh, you can do it.
Yeah, go to AOPA's website. You have to have a comprehensive medical exam every 48 months. So every 40 years. But it's with any medical doctor. So your general practitioner can do it. Part of the class is you learn how to do the questionnaire, and then you take the questionnaire to your doctor, and the doctor signs off that you went over the questionnaire. All right. And conditions requiring treatment must be treated. And then there's, in the class, I'll talk about specific ones that are disqualifying. And go from there. You can have no current denials. What that means is, even if you had a medical after 14 July 2006, if you went to go get a Class 3 and they denied your Class 3, you can't use Basic Med. You can't just supersede it. You have to get a special issuance, and then you can use Basic Med. Once you have a special issuance, you also have to comply with the requirements of your special issuance. All right. Bring all of this up because basic med becomes a question after you have your private pilot's license. It's not really a question when you have your private pilot's license because in order to get your private pilot's license, you probably, unless you are transitioning from another aircraft, had to get a class 3 in order to get your private. Does that make sense? What I don't remember off the top of my head is if the restrictions, in fact, I bet they're not there. The restrictions for flying under basic med will probably be in Part 91. Because you can't fly above 10,000 feet, you can't fly an aircraft with more than 6 seats, and those are operational restrictions. All right. So Part 6151 was 6151. You are more than free to flip to it.
All right. Because I have absolutely no
Pilot
idea.
logbooks?
What's that?
Pilot logbooks.
Pilot logbooks. All right. What do we think we're talking about there?
The stuff you need in your logbook for your license.
Okay. What do we have to log?
Hours.
Sure, but do we have to log every hour that we fly an airplane?
I think so.
No.
Maybe not.
Nope.
Really?
There's a specific list of things that we have to log. What do you think we have to log? See, Virtual, do you know these? Mandatory logins?
Anything that's required for an FAA rating or for currency.
Really?
So your 3 takeoffs and landings, your IPC, any of that kind of stuff that's going to back up the fact you're current, your flight review, whether it's annual or biannual, whatever that is.
Okay. So the certificates of rating and recency of flight experience are mandatory. You must have them logged if you're going to fly. So if you never carry passengers, you could never log crap after you get your private if you really wanted to. Because
Except once every 2 years.
every 2 years you have to go get a flight review.
What about currency in planes? Or
So,
is that not? That's not probably not required.
but
We checked it.
if you, so when we talk about the 3 takeoffs and landings in 90 days, 3 takeoffs and landings after dark in 90 days, that's what you're talking about? Yeah, that is currency to carry passengers.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh,
That
wow.
makes sense.
So, but this is, I bring this up because you will run into guys that at some point in their life have just stopped logging hours and they only log at the bare minimum to stay legal because they just don't care. They got 30,000 hours and at some point that number lost its luster to them and they quit. So logging PIC versus being PIC. So what is the difference between logging PIC and being PIC?
But if you double up, like we were talking last time, if you double up on doing simulated hood
Okay.
time, being a safety pilot or something like that.
Okay,
That's logging.
so both of you can log PIC under those circumstances. Why?
Because one guy's in control and it's simulated hood. The other guy is truly in control, making sure that plane is not according to IMC conditions or
You are hitting the key points. So being PIC is a legal definition, and the PIC that is the PIC supposed to be determined before the flight starts, can change during flight. That is a legal thing. You can change. Oddly, there's nowhere that you are required to document who the PIC is, but the PIC is the one that is legally held responsible for the conduct of the flight.
Which would be the person not under the hood.
Typically, it's the safety pilot is the legal PIC because they're the ones making sure you're not running into clouds and things like that.
if he has you go within 200 feet of a tower.
Yeah, exactly. He's the guy that's responsible for safety of flight. So,
But it's not always that. So Callie can act as a safety pilot in my Aero, but she does not have a complex endorsement.
Oh,
So I have to be the legal PIC. She's a required
Crew member.
crew member, and I can log instrument and she can log pick, and I can log pick as well.
but she's logging it as a safety pilot. So, being PIC, and that's a great example right there. being PIC, you are legally responsible for the flight. Logging PIC, you either have to be the sole manipulators of the flight controls, or you have to be a required primary member of the crew. Because SIC, which we're not going to talk about, second in command, that's when the air crew specifically has like a captain and a first officer. There's a designated second in command role in an aircraft that requires 2 crew members. Virgil's airplane doesn't require 2 air crew. The operation he is conducting requires 2 PIC. Does that make sense?
But you don't actually log the difference in your logbook.
There's no way that you don't log a difference between being PIC, but you do need to, especially when you go for a commercial check ride, you'll want to know the difference between logging and being.
Yeah.
And then 6151 tells you when you can log instrument time, which, we're in an instrument rating class right now. One of the things people don't understand is just because you're on an IFR flight plan doesn't mean you're logging IFR time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to operate the aircraft with sole reference to the instruments to log actual IFR time, or you have to be in simulated IFR using a hood, operating the aircraft with sole reference to the instruments.
So if you're on an IFR flight plan, it could be VFR day.
It absolutely could be VFR day. In fact, the vast majority of the time, when you get up to 22,000 feet, I don't know, what do you typically cruise at? 14? Or you don't have oxygen?
I don't have built-in oxygen, so I usually will stay under 12.5
Under 12.5.
unless I bring the tank. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but so 11,000 feet, very often you'll be in nice, beautiful weather, just cruise along. I fly 22 most of the time, 22, 23. I am almost always on top. Now, do I have to be in clouds? Do I have to actually be in clouds to be logging IFR time?
No.
How could I not?
Isn't visual reference to the ground?
Not technically the ground, but you're on the right track. Okay, if I'm flying above a layer, but the layer is sloped, I have to fly by reference to my instruments. A lot of times the layer will be flat and it'll be even, but my thing is if it's an uneven layer or something like that, I have to be flying by reference to the instruments. I don't have to be in the clouds, I just have to be unable to rely on the natural horizon and the ground for navigation and attitude. Mostly attitude. If you can't maintain your proper attitude, looking outside the plane, then you're in the logging instrument.
So if it was flat clouds, could you not log instrument?
You shouldn't.
Okay.
If the clouds parallel the horizon, you have a horizon.
Okay.
All right, but all right.
A lot of night flights would be another example. There's a lot of time at night where it's dark, you might have a false horizon, maybe have lights, or you might just have no ground illumination.
Especially around here.
Yeah, and so definitely stick with your instruments. Don't trust what you see out the window.
Yeah. So, but yeah, the requirement isn't to be in the clouds. You don't have to call the slang is being in the soup.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to be in the soup. You just have to be reliant upon your instruments for the operation of the aircraft. All right. And honestly, I forgot flight time. Flight time and sim time are not the same thing. You've logged some sim time, right? And we go in and you put it under simulated flight and you put it under dual receive, but it is not flight time. It does not belong in your total flight, and it doesn't belong in your aircraft type lanes, type columns. That's why that was there. All right.
Did that mess you up when you're
It
total?
did. I had to go back and retotal because I put some simulators in.
In the wrong place. Well,
It sucked.
I put the simulators in the wrong place in Virtual's book until in fact, filling out your log caused me to go down a rabbit hole to make sure I was doing it right, and I wasn't.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, I have now modified how I'm doing it for everybody. All right, 6157 is recency of experience piloting command. And the big one, there's two topics that come up here. We talked about one, carrying passengers. So what are the requirements for carrying passengers?
You take out some landings in a day, 3 days landing, full stop agreement.
Okay, do your day landings count towards night currency?
No.
Do your night landings count towards day currency?
Yes.
Okay, so the other one, if you are instrument rated, you have to remain instrument current. All right, does anybody know what the requirements are for that?
You can use
List.
this.
There's a list. You can use a simulator. In fact, there's been a lot of angst about this because it used to be super complicated and then it got super simple.
It says the instrument pursuit for emergency check must consist of at least the following areas of operation: air traffic control clearances, procedures, flight by reference to instruments, navigation systems, instrument approach procedures, emergency operations, post-flight procedures.
Okay, and you said, what was the very first thing you said that was?
Air traffic control.
No. What did you call that?
The instrument proficiency check.
Okay, so you do not immediately have to go to an instrument proficiency check. If you do things correctly, you could never ever take an instrument proficiency check.
Really?
Okay, so with carrying passengers, right? Your 3 landings in 90 days rules. If you go past the 90 days, what do you have to do?
Retake the test. What do you mean?
There's no test.
Or the
Retake your proficiency.
Yeah,
Stuff.
You have to get in a plane by yourself,
and do it.
go solo, and land 3 times. All right. But if in the 90 days, while you're carrying passengers, you land 3 times, you stay current. So that they keep up with you, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't fly for 90 days, the first thing you have to do is get in a plane by yourself and go land 3 times.
Yeah.
But you don't need an instructor. There's no drama. All right, and you can do that. The other thing you have to do is biannual flight reviews, which are no longer called biannual flight reviews. They're just called flight reviews, but they're still required every 24 calendar months. So not more than 24 calendar months between flight reviews. But for instrument, it's a 6 month rule. All right. Once you are current, so right after you pass your check ride, or if you did an IPC, in the next 6 months, you have to do 6 approaches, holds, at least, and there's a big debate here. Most people have learned this, that you have to do at least 1 hold. The word they use is holds, plural, which would infer 2 holds. Rod Machado says you have to do 2. He's like, it has an S. But a hold is just entering the hold. So even if you do a hold in lieu of a procedure turn, if you just do the teardrop entry, or if you just do a parallel entry, that is a hold. All right? And then the last part is intercept and track courses. Now, it is impossible to fly an approach and not intercept and track a course. You cannot possibly do it. So, if you do 6 approaches and at least 2 holds every 6 months within the 6-month window, you're current. You just stay current. They can all be done in a simulator. Okay? But if you go, and in the first 6 months, you can file and go do it. If you go 6 months and you don't hit all those things, you have to do whatever you need to get your 6+ in the 6-month window with a safety pilot or in a simulator. You can't do them under actual IFR. You can't file and go fly. That's the 6 + 6.
Because you're not current.
Because you're not current, you cannot file. All right? But you can get current. So, like, if you had the day before your 6-month window ended, if you did 4 approaches and a hold, and then you hit your 6 months, so you're out of currency.
You have to do 2 more approaches.
You have to do 2 approaches and a hold. But you can do them in a simulator, or you can do them with a safety pilot, and just go do them in VFR1.
And you're current.
And you're good. Or you can do them with an IFR rated pilot if they file, and you go fly. It does not have to be a CFI. All right, but you're flying on the other guy's ticket. So, otherwise, if you go a whole year and you come completely out, you have to do an IPC, an instrument proficiency check. It's that whole laundry list of things you're doing. You're doing one right now, kind of an extended one.
I'm reveling in it.
Exactly. So, but you're doing an extended one. Jasper's doing an extended one. They typically turn out that way. If you go a year without flying instruments at all, most people are just like, I am not comfortable doing this, and you take some time. All right? You have to cover the regulations. You have to do, interestingly, you don't have to do 6 approaches. You have to do approaches that the instructor feels is significant or the examiner. Can be done by a DPE. I don't know why you would ever do that because they're going to charge you $1,000 for one day. But DPE, a CFII, or an FAA safety inspector to do it. All right. It's like a flight review, but specifically for instruments. There's a guidebook. There's a checklist. There are specific things that have to be done, and one of the weird ones is you cannot do the whole thing in a simulator. You have to do 2 things in an actual airplane. You remember what they are?
I thought it was just circle to land. You also have to do the holds in an airplane?
Nope.
Oh.
You have to do a circle to land approach in an actual aircraft, and you must at least once land from an approach in an actual aircraft. Not necessarily your circle to land. But what most people do is the reason everybody thinks it's just the one is you go out, if you're just checking the box, you do a circle to land and you land, and that covers 2 of them. And those 2 have to be done in an airport. And if you look in the ACS for instrument pilot, in the back, there's a list of tasks that the instructor has to go over with you. But it's not just the simple 6 plus 2 holds. All right, intercept track course. Simulation and instrument control. We talked about that as we were going. Bottom line is, once you have your instrument rating, you can do all of those approaches in the TD2, and they are perfectly valid. They count for currency without an instructor present. When you're training, none of your time counts without a CFII present. You have to have a double I. All right. So, 61-133, this is a question for when you get your commercial license. Limitations without an instructor, without an instrument rating. You can only fly within 50 nautical miles of the airport if you're carrying passengers for hire. And you can only fly during the day if you're carrying passengers for hire. So why do people get commercial ratings if they don't have an instrument rating?
Because you don't need, there's jobs that are just VFR.
Mag spring, parachute drop.
Yeah, not everything's IFR.
Yeah, now, parachute drop, you have to be within the 50 nautical mile rule because you're carrying passengers for hire.
Oh, yeah.
But, on a passenger, usually they don't go 2 miles from the airport. They go straight up, and some people, and then they dive like they're trying to fall faster than the skydivers, so they can take the next batch up. But banner towing, you're not carrying passengers. Glider towing, and in fact, you can tow gliders with a private pilot license if you meet some other requirements, right?
Yeah, that craziness.
But if you're getting paid to do it, you have to have a commercial license.
Daytime only though. Even though as a private you can fly night?
Yeah, because you can't carry passengers for hire.
Okay.
So big one is just 61-133 limitations. Okay. FAR 91, or as Nicole likes to call it, how to break a pilot. All right, because if you're going to get violated, you're probably violating 91. There's some weird things to understand. What are other rules? So 91 is operating rules. What are the other operating rules parts? So we, as private pilots, fly under Part 91.
83. That one?
Nope, that is a wild guess. That is wrong.
What's an air charter and what's a commercial airline?
141?
That's a
No, 141 is a flight school.
Okay.
But it starts with one and it ends with one.
It does.
111?
What? No. You're wrong.
Just all the ones.
I don't want to run down this rabbit hole forever. So Part 121 is scheduled air carriers.
Okay.
So that's your heavy metal guys. TWA and well, the TWA didn't exist anymore.
Yeah, Delta and Southwest.
Delta and Southwest. There you go. Those guys. All right. And then Part 135 is air taxi operations.
Okay.
This is a very generalization, but so non-scheduled carriers. So Dave has a Part 135 certificate. He uses it for like air tours and flying guys to the backcountry, that kind of stuff. Would fall under Part 135.
Because he's an air taxi. So
It's an air taxi. Yeah. Call up an airplane to take you someplace, but you tell them where you want to go and when you want to go.
So charter pilots would be under 130?
Yeah. Most of the time.
Okay.
Yes. So now I don't want to oversimplify. I don't want to oversimplify, but we're not going to complicate it. What I want you to understand is there are rules that are different than Part 91 for operations. They are almost invariably stricter. They have tighter requirements. Part 91 is kind of the Wild West. You're allowed to do a lot of crazy crap in Part 91 because you are solely responsible for you and your passengers didn't pay you, so they have accepted the risk of flying with you. Part 121, Part 135, there's another part that has some weird commercial operators. I forget what it is off the top of my head. But
119.
yeah,
Covers like basic commercial stuff.
yeah. But those guys, somebody paid them to fly, and a lot of times they got in the plane with them. The rules are there to protect those paying customers, not the people flying the plane. Does that make sense? So, and that's going to specifically come up with departures in IFR. But so far, 91. 91.3, and the big thing I want you to take out of 91, this is responsibility and authority of pilot in command. Now this is specifically when you are being the pilot in command. You have the ultimate responsibility and authority, and Part 91.3 gives you the ability to legally break any rule in this book in the event of an emergency if you deem it's necessary to have a potential positive outcome of the flight. Alright? But that authority comes with the responsibility. You have, and so in IFR flight, I think the best example I can come up with in my head is if I'm on an IFR flight and I have an engine failure and I have to come down IFR into a place that has no freaking instrument approach and I'm making my own, and so I'm using my iPad's hazard advisor to come down flying through the mountains to land in Libby. I didn't look to see if Libby actually has an approach. Troy. Troy barely has a runway. All right? But if I determine that the safest thing for me to do is spiral down through a cloud layer to 200 feet above the ground and smack my plane down on Libby, I broke a whole crap ton of bars in that process. I didn't break any rules. As long as I declared the emergency. And, when able, told ATC what I was doing. And when I get on the ground, when asked, I have to tell them what I was doing. And if asked, I may have to write a report. Okay?
So it's just if they ask, you don't have to.
You do not automatically have to write a report. In fact, the FAA, as a matter of policy, only asks for reports if they specifically can use them to improve safety of flight. or if they're pursuing enforcement action. But they want people to declare the emergency and to exercise the right, the ability to do what they need to do. They would much rather you get on the radio, say, hey, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. I'm at 10,500 feet above Libby, IFR, and I just had an engine failure. I am going to circle down and land at Libby. And does Libby have an approach?
Yeah.
I keep saying Libby. I should say
Troy.
what's the other one?
Troy.
Troy. Because Troy is smaller and crappier. Well, and I know they don't have any echo over
Libby does have a GPSA approach.
it. Okay. But Troy does not. My guess is Troy does not because it has no class echo. Until 1,200 feet.
No known procedures.
Okay. So, yeah, they might ask you what the hell you're doing, and you'd be like, yeah, I'm using my GPS and my synthetic vision to make my own approach because I can't glide anymore. Single engineer failure over the top or whatever, you're going to have to work through it. Okay. Portable electronic devices. I always thought that this was a whole, you can't have any portable electronic devices that mess with the navigation system at any time. If you go back and read the regulation, unless I'm reading it wrong, it's specifically in IFR. But who's responsible for making that determination?
PIC.
Us.
PIC, owner-operator.
Yeah. So it says, owner or any operator, pilot, and command of an aircraft allow.
So, now there is an entire AC that talks about electronic devices in aircraft. Specifically says that your electronic flight bag does not count. So, like your iPad, your iPad's considered an EFB. But you should determine. I will tell you one place where people do cause problems with their iPads. They'll throw them on the glare shield, and they make your magnets spin. Your compass will do crazy crap. All right. 91-103, pre-flight actions. What do you have to do, boss?
Well, you need to familiarize yourself with everything regarding that flight, aka, eight tomato flames and all that other stuff.
All available information. It literally says that. All right. And then Northwest Craft. Now I'll tell you, everywhere, like studying up for this stuff, it's Northwest Craft. And the first one's NOTAMs.
Yeah.
Nowhere in Part 103 does it say you have to read the NOTAMs. It does not specify. But this is because I love you guys. I went and looked. Part 91-137 and other places in the FAR say that you must check the NOTAMs before you want to fly. All right?
You only got 3
Yes.
because of check rides,
Check rides and
vacations.
it is what it is.
No, it's just keep marching.
So
We got the 3 best ones I see.
we do.
Yeah.
You're helping with a play this week, so I think he's listening in remotely.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Kind of funny how separated we are. Private pilot almost, guy like Chris Ridden.
1993. Yeah.
Well, he got his ticket before I got mine. So this is one Northwest Craft. Know this for your check ride. But then be prepared to go to 103. All right, and I told you part of what I was going to tell you is how to study these things. Almost every one of these acronyms that you find ties directly to some law, some regulation, right? So start organizing them that way. And that's why I went down this weird rabbit hole about NOTAMs, because I always learned Northwest Craft together. Weather reports and forecasts, known traffic delays, runway lengths, alternates, fuel requirements, takeoff and landing distance information is verbatim out of 103. And then somebody smarter than me at some point went, you know what? There's like 5 places in the regs that tells you also have to check the NOTAMs first. And 103 says all available information to include. So they added NOTAMs to this list. So this is an example where as you're studying and you go and read the source material, when you find a discrepancy like that of, okay, everybody says it's Northwest Craft. Where the hell did this NOTAM thing come from? Bust out the electronic version of the FAR because that's a pain in the ass. And Google NOTAMs and start reading the parts to see where it tells you. And when I didn't actually say 137, but 137 says something to the effect of, before you go fly, you have to check the NOTAMs and make sure you don't run into a TFR. I think that's what that one says.
Okay.
Am I good?
Spot on.
Okay. So I just use that as an example because on your orals, especially if you're doing an instructor oral, so commercial oral, instructor oral, if you cite Northwest Craft and you get the guy that wants to send you down a rabbit hole, well, it doesn't say I have to look up NOTAMs. Then you can come back and go, well, it doesn't say in Part 103, but it's inferred in 91-137 and other parts of the regulation, and it's just easier to condense it with all available information. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to have fun, take 8 tomato flames and go try to find the exact FR section that's each one of those items. And some of them are right there, and some of those are actually not in that required equipment section.
I went through them recently.
Didn't you find a couple that are in 8 tomato flames that are like...
They're just not stated the same way.
Yeah.
They didn't use the exact word. It kind of comes down to they were inferred by the way it was written in there. But 8 tomato, that part, we're going to get to that part again here in a minute. But just back to 91-103, no Northwest Craft, but know that NOTAMs comes from somewhere else. All right? And then if you go and read, in fact, parts of this, I don't remember which parts, specifically say for flights, IFR flights and outside the airport, or outside the local environment or something like that. And then there's another one that's like for all flights. For all flights, I think it's takeoff and landing distance information, but they break it up for some reason. You're like, okay, but you really just need to know this for all of them. And all of them, it says all available information, which must include. All right. Minimum safe altitudes. So this is one that for the guys prepping for their private, I hammered you on pretty hard. Know the phrase, except when necessary for takeoff or landing, no person may operate an aircraft below the following altitudes. And then there's 3 different answers. There's anywhere, over congested areas, over other than congested areas, and then the other than congested areas actually has 2 subparts. All right? So what's the anywhere? Do you remember?
I didn't know anywhere was a thing.
Okay, pull it up.
Okay.
91-119.
91-119. Okay. Over altitude okay, I do know this one. An altitude if a power unit fails in emergency landing without undue hazard to first responder.
Okay, so if you lose an engine, you have to be able to land without causing undue hazards to person property. Doesn't mean that there can't be a risk, but what that says is you can't go flying around so low that if you lose an engine, you can't at least have the opportunity to maneuver and avoid smacking things on the ground that people care about. All right, so that's anywhere. All right, what's the rule over congested areas?
1,000 above from 2,000 horizontal, the tallest obstruction.
You must be 1,000 feet above the highest obstruction within a 2,000-foot radius of your current location. Okay? And then, other than congested areas,
It's 500 above any person or property except over sparsely areas or water, which then you could be right on the surface, but you have to be 500 from any person in any direction, just not
Yes.
from above.
slant line distance. So, okay.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 5, you can be on the surface, or I'm
So,
reading here. It says
This is the one that confuses the crap out of everybody. Other than congested area, so that's anywhere that's not considered congested. And oh, by the way, where does the definition for congested area, where is it?
Oh boy.
Yeah, that's the
In
answer.
the definitions.
It is not. You would think it is. The FAA has deliberately not defined it.
That's right.
They've never defined it. Now, there is some case law that you can go back to. I think Rick Durden explained that has come down to 3 houses within a quarter of a mile, that they have called that a congested area. Any collection of people outside has been defined as a congested area.
So a boat.
Yeah.
So,
Like that.
yeah, so vessels, a highway,
Yeah.
a highway with cars on it, more than one car, would be considered congested area. So, but other than congested areas, we actually have those around here. We've got areas where there's nobody at all. All right. But
Reading here, it says other than congested areas, an altitude of 500 feet above the surface, except over open water or sparsely populated.
That's the one you could be.
and they also do not define sparsely populated areas. So, but I was flying looking for sheep a couple weeks ago, and some of the orbits, I was well under 500 feet above the ground. It was mountain goat territory. There were no people there. I consider that sparsely populated. In fact, there's no houses, no structures. It's also protected land, and I was flying for the Forest Service, or actually fishing wildlife. But you are taking on some interpretive risk when you do that. And then helicopters get to fly. It's kind of like, just don't hit anything.
Yeah, look at number D. D says you could ignore B and C.
Yeah.
Helicopter.
So, okay. The big one that I want you to take away from that is there are 3.5 answers in there, because that's how the regulation's written. And the big one is anywhere. Minimum safe altitude is an altitude where if you have an engine failure, you're not going to cause somebody else a problem. All right. 91-121. This one's a weird one that, and it has to do with the fact that at flight levels we use 29.92 on your Boltzmann window. It goes into a shocking explanation about when you make that change. And the bottom line is you fly with a local altimeter setting up to 17,999 feet, and upon passing through 18,000 feet, you switch it to 29.92, and on the descent, at 18,000 feet, you switch to the local altimeter. Now, the truth is, nobody really cares that precisely because they don't stack stuff in that fuzzy zone. So, all right. So, compliance with ATC clearances and instructions, 91-123. This whole rule boils down to you have to follow the clearance that you are given. If they amend your clearance, you have to follow the amended clearance, except if it's an emergency, or if you have an actual TCAS resolution. All right. And I go through this one specifically because none of the aircraft you will fly have TCAS. You have traffic awareness, you have TAWS or something like that, or you have ADS-BN. Getting a warning from ADS-BN does not qualify for deviating from your IFR clearance. You are expected to get on the radio and ask for a resolution. Now, that said, if something happens and you do decide to take action because of your onboard traffic awareness, you need to immediately be on the radio saying, hey, in fact, you see and avoid, I just saw something that made me feel I had to deviate course. I turned 90 degrees to the right to avoid traffic. Do you see what I am seeing? I'm back in the soup. Whatever. But if you're in an airplane with actual TCAS, traffic collision and avoidance system, the TCAS will not only tell you that there is traffic, it will tell you to climb or descend or turn. Usually it's climb or descend. All right? You are required by law to follow that TCAS if it goes off.
Do you have TCAS in your plan?
No. I have TAWS and I have ADSB. So I have two different traffic awareness systems, but mine do not give me resolution. A resolution is a command. It would tell you which direction to go. If you're flying a TCAS, a certified TCAS installed aircraft, most of those are Part 121. Very few 135s will have them, but it gives you an actual resolution. It tells you what action to take. You are not legally allowed to deviate from the instruction that TCAS gives you.
Does TCAS broadcast that to ATC then? Or do you?
TCAS, no, it's just audible on your head.
Okay.
You then have to tell ATC that you were given a TCAS resolution. And if you do, you want to use the phrase, I received a TCAS resolution that told me to, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll get all, you're going to get vectors and told where to go. But the big thing is, I want you to understand that there are two different, there's more than two, but there's a big difference between TCAS and all of the other traffic awareness systems. And if TCAS tells you to do something, you have to do it. If you get it, because all you get with the other systems are alerts. Warning, traffic 11 o'clock. And traffic 11 o'clock 2 miles, traffic 11 o'clock 1 mile, Yeah, if you get somebody that's within your 4 mile bubble, the first thing you should do is get on the radio and call ATC and say, hey, I'm getting a traffic warning. If they're within your 4 mile bubble and within 500 feet of your altitude. Because they separate you at 500 feet. Instrument traffic is only separated from VFR traffic by 500 feet. All right. What did I just... Where's my... Okay. This section I reordered about 6 times, and I still don't like the order, so you're going to bear with me just a little bit. We're talking about a little bit of operations in Class G airspace, operations in surface-based Class E. All right, so then FAR 91-126, operating on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class G airspace. What is Class G airspace?
Uncontrolled.
Okay, it's uncontrolled. So an airport within Class G airspace is very unlikely to have a control tower. It is not impossible. And where would you have Class E airspace that has a control tower?
Class E that becomes Class D.
Oh, well, that's one. But Coeur d'Alene, every summer, it's a Class E airport. They get a control tower every summer.
Why is it?
Because of firefighters. There's so much firefighting traffic, they bring the tower. Did you know that Coeur d'Alene averages more takeoffs and landings a day than Geiger?
Yeah, almost double.
So they're petitioning to get a tower, but it will take 10 years.
Yeah, it could be a nightmare.
But Part 91-126 is one of the weird little regulations that say that unless otherwise posted, you make left turns in the path. What's funny is there's a thing about flap settings in 91-126.
Yeah.
What does it say?
Except when necessary for training or certification, each pilot in command of a civil projectile aircraft must use as a final flap setting the minimum certified landing flap setting.
They specific to turbojets. I just thought it was funny that there's a flap setting rule in the regular. You have to use your flaps.
Yeah.
But that's in a turbojet. Okay. And then communication with control towers. If there's a tower, you have to talk to them. That's the rule. All right. If you've ever dealt with the towers at Coeur d'Alene, they are super informal. They don't have radar. They're looking for you with binoculars, and very often they've never worked there before, so they don't even know which direction they're looking sometimes. What I will tell you is in those temp tower situations, you need to be like 6 times as careful, because they will give you instructions, and there may very well be some local guy who didn't read the NOTAMs and realize there was a tower, because they don't leave the tower on the CTAF, they give it a different frequency, and you got dudes flying around doing what they normally do, and guys that have never been there giving you instructions to do things that aren't what people normally do, and you can end up in conflicts quickly. My student from Spokane and I were doing his very last flight before his check ride. We've just done a whole bunch of unusual attitudes because I had missed them in the checklist for private. So under the hood, foggle unusual attitudes. And we're going back into Coeur d'Alene, call the tower. The tower tells us, okay, you're number 2 to land behind such and such a plane. And 2 airplanes cut in between us, not on frequencies. So, just be aware. If it's a temporary tower, it can be chaos and mayhem.
The FAA has got such their eyes on Coeur d'Alene so much anyways. I'm surprised they don't raise a little more bell about that.
Well, the new manager is much better down there, so things are improving. The old manager, one of the things that they wanted, that the locals wanted, was that on the ASOS, they wanted it to broadcast that there was a tower open, and he refused to put it on because he says that the regs say you can't. I'm like, I don't know where he gets that. There's lots of airports that tell you which runway is the fair weather runway. So, but anyway, I don't want to go down that road.
How can a Class G airspace have an air control tower? Because then wouldn't it be controlled airspace?
Technically, the FAA will say they are only giving you advisories.
Okay.
You can still run a plane with
Now,
radio in there.
Coeur d'Alene is actually Class E.
Yeah, so that's
So that's controlled airspace. All right, it's just tower, and then it's tower controlled. You don't see many Gs with even temp towers. Air shows would be an example, though, when they might.
Oh, okay.
So, and sometimes they will do a temporary NOTAM and turn that into Class E space to the ground. All right. Vicinity of E departures, communications with control towers. The big thing is there are only 2 approved departures in an airplane. Do we know what they are?
Left turn or straight out? So it's you.
So there's straight out, and there's a left 45. All right. So when people do like a downwind departure, that is a non-standard departure. Now, I am of the opinion that the whole point is to be safe. And sometimes making a downwind departure is the safest answer. Sometimes a straight-in landing is the safest answer. Terrain can cause that to be, if you ever fly into heliport, you'll see that we've got a pretty tight space. If we are going like towards Coeur d'Alene, we will take off and make a right-hand departure because there's a hill right in front of you. All right? And then the rest of the time we turn left, but left puts us into the bowl. With Newman Lake. So, plus it's a private airport. Kind of do what we want. All right. Let's see. Again, communication with control towers. If there's a control tower, you have to talk to them. All right, Class D airspace. So what is a deviation in controlled airspace?
Want me to read it?
Sure.
An operator may deviate from any provision of this section under the provisions of an ATC authorization issued by the ATC facility having jurisdiction over the airspace concerned. ATC may also authorize a deviation on a continuing basis or for an individual flight as appropriate.
So bottom line is, there's what normally happens, but if the tower controller in Class D tells you can do something different, you can do something different. If you want to do something different a lot, you can talk to the airport controller, and they can give you a permanent authorization, like a letter of authorization or letter of deviation, letter of instruction. All right, so deviation communications. Class D, you are required to establish two-way radio communications before you enter the airspace. Unless you're no radio and you're coordinated in advance, and almost all of those deviations are 1 hour in advance. You literally pick up the phone and call them, or you have somebody else call them on the radio and request a deviation. I believe noise abatement, correct me if I'm wrong, noise abatement specifically says something about you have to comply with it if you are over, if you're a turbojet or blah, blah, blah.
So like cars with big exhaust type thing.
Each pilot of a large or turbine powered aircraft assigned a noise abatement runway by ATC must use that runway.
So noise abatement procedures are technically voluntary for most 91 operations. All right. Now, if you fly in and out of the same place a lot, you may not want to get a reputation. Deer Park is interesting. They've got a big sign that says, "Please don't overfly the city." The airport's right next to the city,
Yes.
and the pattern goes over the city. You have to fly the pattern.
So when Kalispell or when Glacier tells us to fly straight in final, is that then technically a deviation? Because it's not the pattern's normal operating.
I think there is a logical argument to say that that is a deviation, except it is so common that nobody would call it a deviation. Having a tower give you a straight-in approach is super common because it's efficient.
Yeah.
Just like having a tower give you a straight-out departure, or a right-hand crosswind departure, depending on where they are, super efficient. So, but if you're flying at a Class D, here's one that threw me off. I don't fly in a lot of Towers airports anymore for some reason, just because of where we live. Flew to Kalispell and we're departing, and I'm like, do I have to ask permission to turn my crosswind?
I don't think so.
No, you just make the turn. But we took off. I always fly IFR when I'm going places, and so I'm so used to being told when to turn that we were getting ready to depart. And a student in the other seat, like, ooh, crap. I'm like, I just heat up the mic and asked. I'm like, hey, do I have to request permission to turn crosswind? They're like, no, you can turn whatever you want. Okay, some towers, though, will get chippy with you if you turn and they feel like you turned early or did something weird. So just be advised. They're expecting you to fly the standard pattern, which says that you're going to fly to within 300 feet of pattern altitude before turning crosswind. You're going to fly up to pattern altitude. You're going to stay within a half mile and a mile of the runway, blah, 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 blah. But you always get, when you get cleared for takeoff, you're cleared for takeoff with a X direction departure. And you take your departure. If you want to keep in their good graces, clarify. If you're going to make a downwind departure, when you make the request to depart, say, I'm headed to the south, request a downwind departure. And then they'll say it out loud, and then everybody's happy because they know what you're doing.
The other thing, go visit the airport's website. Because if it's a busy airport, like if you're going to fly to Boeing or Renton in Seattle, the airport will publish recommended entry and departure things. So they want you to fly over this water tower and do this. So if you know that ahead of time, it's a lot easier for ATC because you know what all the locals are going to be doing. You can do the exact same thing they were. It's not regulatory, but their website will just have a link to a thing that has, hey, here's how to get into our airport nicely.
Okay.
This is how the locals do it.
Yep.
All right. So, Class D airspace, you will need typically takeoff, landing, and taxi clearance. An interesting one here is if you look, some very small Class Ds won't have any controlled taxi areas. So you just call the tower and you tell them where you are and that you're going to taxi. But they don't actually clear you to taxi because it's not a controlled movement area. Technically, it's called a non-movement area, but it's where you can move without any permission. So, all right. Operations in Class Charlie. Big thing in Class Charlie, you're almost always going to have an operating control tower. But Class Charlie can also include the satellite airports. Class Delta can too, but it's much more rare. It's rare to have two airports within 4 miles of each other. It does happen, but Class Charlie, though, if you are flying to one of the outstations that doesn't have a tower, it's a normal pilot controlled airfield, except you have to be in communication with the Class Charlie controller. If you take off from a satellite airfield, you do not necessarily have to be in contact with them until you are airborne. And then it's as soon as practicable, which I don't think is a real word, but it's in the FAA. Okay. And then the equipment requirements for operating in Class Charlie are actually covered in 91.225. All right. What are some of the big ones?
Equipment requirements.
To operate in Class Charlie.
Mode C transponder. ADSB out.
Yep.
Radio, yeah.
Radio. That's super easy. Oh, and it's super easy to get a deviation for a radio, and super easy to get a deviation for your Mode C transponder. If you're flying in and your Mode C transponder kicks the bucket, what do you have to do?
Tell them.
Request a deviation. They can do it immediately.
Okay.
So. 91.131, Class B. All right. Big one here is, unless you get specific training, you have to have at least a private license to fly in. So solo student pilots cannot fly into a Bravo unless they get specific training and an endorsement. You must be cleared into the Bravo. Now, here's something that'll throw you off. If you're on an IFR flight plan, you do not hear the words cleared into the Bravo. They don't say it. Because you're already under ATC control. ATC cleared you through any airspaces you are going through. Some guys do ask, confirm that they're cleared into the Bravo. Bigger one is confirm you're cleared into a restricted area. And if they route you through a MOA, confirm that they deliberately routed you through a MOA. Most of the time they route you around MOAs as an IFR flight. Ironically, most of the time you'll go straight through all the restricted areas. Because they're usually not active. Restricted areas are very rarely active. MOAs are very frequently active. All right, so Mode C. Yeah. Nothing rocket science in this one. All right, Class A. You must be IFR. You must be IFR current. You must be on an IFR flight plan. If you're above 24,000 feet, you also have to have DME or GPS.
You don't need GPS for 10,000 or 18,000 up?
Nope.
Really?
You can fly on VORs only below 18,000. You don't have to have a GPS above 24,000 feet if you have VORs and DMEs. That's how they used to do it all the time. But anymore, everybody has GPS. All right. You must be ATC authorized, and you have to have a transponder. If your transponder fails, they can let you continue to fly in Class Alpha. They very rarely will. If you're a carrier 121, 135, they probably will, so that you can get to where you're going to do maintenance, because they don't want to screw up the flow. But 91, bebopping around up, if you're especially up with the heavy metal, they don't want you up in that mess. All right. So VFR rules. All right, VFR basic weather minimums. These two pictures basically say the same thing. There are different ways of studying it. Big thing to know is 18,000 feet and above is all Class A. It's all 18,000 up to 60,000 feet is Class A. That's IFR only, so there are no cloud clearance rules. You can't be up there unless you're on an IFR flight plan. Period. So the top of the little pyramid is 18,000 feet. All right. The little horizontal bar is 10,000 feet MSF. So mean sea level. Above 10,000 feet, Echo and Golf have special rules. All right. The big one to remember is it's just 5111. 5 miles visibility, and you have to have a mile away from cloud. 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, and a mile. Yeah, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, and you have to be a mile away from a cloud. Below 10,000 feet, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo are all 152. So 3 miles, 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below,
1,000.
2,000 feet horizontally, except Bravo. Technically, Bravo is clear of clouds, but it is still 3 miles visibility. All right. So, but Charlie, Delta, and Echo they're always 3,152. All right. Class G at night is 3,152. Class G during the day has to go get all complicated on you. So above 1,200 feet during the day, it's 1 mile visibility, 152. 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, 2,000 feet horizontally. Below 1,200 feet, it's 1 mile and clear of clouds. Now, that is something to know because we use that around here sometimes. Below 700 feet, we're in class golf. We're standing in class golf airspace right now. All right? There are times where that 1 mile and clear of clouds, especially if you're instrument rated, can be to your advantage. You can get up, you can get off, you can go down the valley, and then you can climb out. You can scooch out under things. If you know the only time you want to use that is in a place that you have flown frequently. All right? But 1 mile and clear of clouds is also special VFR minimums. You cannot get special VFR into here. Why not?
Because we already are special VFR.
Well, because we're class golf.
There's no tower.
No tower.
You can't turn ADC.
There you go. And they can't keep you on radar.
Where's that triangle diagram from? Is that a Rod Machado?
That's a Rod Machado tool.
It would be.
And he actually has a video where he draws it as he talks through it. That is a great one. This is one of 2 that I have seen that are really good to learn for your cheat sheet for going into your written exams and stuff. If you just sketch that out. The other one, it's called the 313 method, and if you YouTube Google it, there's a guy, just 313 airspace method. Guy made up this method and he draws a little hieroglyph and it turns into an E and a G. And by the time he's done, he's outlined all of the different things. So I made a slide for it and then took it out because it's too complicated to explain in a class. All right, so, yep, special VFR. E, D, and C, and B surface. E, D, C, and B surface area only, including surface-based extensions. Below 10,000 feet, allows you to fly within 1 mile visibility, remain clear of clouds. Also, you have to look on the sectional, because like in New York, I know there's a whole bunch of them that have no SVFR, no special VFRs authorized. SVFR, during the day, you can do it with just private pilot's license. At night, you must have an instrument rating. And you still have to stay 1 mile in clear of clouds either way. At night, it's just trickier to do because, it's hard to see a cloud. All right. IFR. So, fuel requirements for IFR fuel conditions. What's the rule for IFR fuel?
Get your destination plus an alternate plus 45 minutes of fuel.
Okay, what if you don't have to have an alternate?
Didn't know you didn't have to have an alternate.
Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. If you don't have, if with rules that I'm going to teach you in a minute.
You have to be able to reach another aircraft or an airport you can land at without.
If you're going to fly to your destination and from there for 45 minutes at cruise. But it's 45 minutes at cruise flight is the magic one. If you're required to have an alternate, it's to your intended destination, to your final alternate, and then 45 minutes at cruise. Okay? So, and I put on here alternate the 1, 2, 3 rule. Alright? But we're going to cover that. Oh, maybe not. Oh, there we go. Required flight plan. So C91-153, alternates, 1, 2, 3 rule. So 1 hour before to 1 hour after, if the visibility is 2 miles or more, and the ceiling is 3,000 feet or more, you are not required to have an alternate on your flight plan if the airport you're flying to has an approach. If the airport does not have an approach, you must have an alternate. So if it's a VFR only airport,
Okay.
or if the weather is going to be less than 2 miles visibility and or 3,000 foot ceilings for any point in time between 1 hour before and 1 hour after your intended arrival. It's important because if the TAF is all VFR with one little tiny,
MVFR.
yeah, 1,900 foot ceiling for 10 minutes, then you have to have an alternate. All right? So for the purposes of orals and practicals and that, you have to know the 1, 2, 3 rule, and you have to be able to cite it and kind of go through it. For reality, unless you are really stretching fuel for some reason, always pick an alternate. Always follow an alternate. And, okay, if you fly to the place, if you fly to your primary destination, and you can't get in for any reason, what do you do next?
Go to your alternate. If you can't get into your place.
Maybe.
Fuel emergency?
No, you're not in an emergency yet. Not even close.
Ask for deviation.
I would reassess my whole plan. I would say, do I want to do another approach? Is there a chance? Like, why did I not get in? Was I just unstabilized? Is my own fault? Or is the weather crap?
Okay.
And then before I proceed to my alternate, I would say, well, what's the weather at my alternate? Maybe it's changed. Maybe it wasn't what was forecasted. Maybe it's a better airport.
Well, realistically, if you are flying in and the current METAR at your primary is right at your minimums, not at the minimums, I'm saying at your minimums, at your skill set, you should, before you even start the approach, get the weather at your alternate and go, hey, is this a good plan? While you've got 30 minutes to screw around and figure some things out, and then go, okay, because if the weather where you were going is worse than you thought it was going to be, it's possible that the weather where you were going to alternate to is worse than it's going to be. Sometimes you make a decision hours before. So I got a 4 hour leg. I will fly 4 hours at a time. I'm cruising along. I check the weather, because I have onboard weather, halfway and see what I'm coming into. I have been known to go, I'm not going where I was planning, and deviate there. Get on the radio and go, hey, you know what? The weather where I was headed sucks. I'm going to go to a different state. I'm going to go someplace else. I'm going to get away from that crap and get on the ground. My land right where I'm at. You are not, my whole point of this is the alternate is an alternate for planning purposes. All right? You may or may not go to the alternate, but it makes you look at what's going on. Usually your alternate has to be far enough away that it makes sense that you'll get outside of the same weather. But like here, it's easy to put Sandpoint as an alternate lots of times because they have better weather than we have up here a lot. So, okay, that's perfectly valid. But if I'm flying in and your weather went to crap and Sandpoint's at crap, I might go to Coeur d'Alene. Make a choice. I like how Virgil put it though, you're going to reassess your plan. This is your early plan. I usually have some idea of where I might stop if I cut the trip short. Or if I'm going to go, in the bigger plane, part of what I'm doing too is making sure I'm not hunting for a runway that's going to be long enough, or that's going to have fuel, that sort of stuff. I try to limit those things down early. And I have the ability to check the weather continuously while I'm flying now, and I don't have to call 17 people to ask. Well, guess what? If you got ADSB in, which you can buy, a little brick like this, and you get ADSB in on your iPad. So even if the plane doesn't have it, you have it. And then you can get weather textually as you're flying along. All right, so the Precision 602, non-Precision 802. Do anybody know what those rules are about?
600 feet per minute. So then
No. So this has to do with alternates, selecting alternates. There are legal restrictions on where you can file as an alternate on the flight plan. Okay? And one of the weird rules is if your alternate has a precision approach, it has to, at your expected time of arrival, what does it say?
For precision approach procedure, ceiling of 600 feet and visibility of 2 statute miles.
Those are the minimums that, for planning purposes. All right, if all they have is a non-precision approach, which all GPS approaches are non-precision approaches, let's have 800-foot ceilings and 2-mile visibility.
Sorry, for this purpose, an RNAV LPV is not considered precision. Okay, that is good to know.
In fact, I will double check something. I believe that from a legal standpoint, the only precision approaches that exist are ILS and PAR.
Yeah.
GPS is not, even with vertical guidance, even though it gives you a 200-foot ceiling, it's not considered a precision approach. I will double check that. I'm 95% sure I've got that right. Okay. So, and then if the airport doesn't, if your alternate does not have an approach at all, if for some reason you put Troy down as an alternate, you have to be able to descend from the minimum en route altitude and approach and land entirely in VFR. That VFR has to be forecast for that 1 hour plus or minus. Okay? Cancellation. So when you finish your flight, you are required to cancel your IFR flight plan. If you land at a towered airport, they automatically cancel it for you. When your wheels hit the ground and you turn off and they tell you to switch to ground, they have automatically canceled your IFR flight plan, which is good. If you land anywhere that does not have a tower, so at any pilot-controlled airfield, you have a few options. One, while you're coming in, if you can fly all the rest of the way there in VFR, you can cancel in the air on the radio. Two, if you're lucky, when you land, you can cancel on the ground by radio because radio might still talk to somebody. Doesn't work here. So three, if you know that you're not going to have good radio communication on the ground, you can ask them to give you a phone number while you're coming in, and they will sometimes do that. Or you can use a phone number found in ForeFlight for how to pick up a clearance at that airport, and you can call them and cancel. And then finally, you can call 1-800-WEATHER BRIEF and tell them that you've landed at an airport and you need to close your flight plan. But you need to close and cancel your flight plan. Otherwise, they lock off the airspace until they can get a hold of you, which makes people very, very upset. All right. Alternate airports and GPS. There is at least one question in the question bank about this, and it's very specific. If you have a non-WAS enabled GPS, you cannot list an airport as your alternate if its only arrivals are WAS. And this is one, I think, that actually does not count if the original airport has a non-GPS approach. One of your two airports has to have a non-GPS approach. It's a little confusing in the regs, and I don't ever fly anything that's non-WAS. until recently. So our 182 here has non-loss GPSs. So 2 things with non-loss: you have to do range checks, and you have to make sure that you have alternates that have 8 different means of approaching, which usually means ILS or VOR approaches now. What are we doing for time? 18:30. All right. Reasoning behind 800. When you do arrive at your alternate, that 802, 602 are irrelevant. They go out the window. You land according to the minimums on the plates. The reason for the 802 and 602 rules is to make it's a forced pessimism. If you have to go alternate, it means that your original airport had worse weather than you were expecting, and the theory is that the alternates in your area are probably going to have worse weather than they were expecting. So, all right. I failed to finish making this slide. VOR checks. You have to do it every 30 days. It's done by the pilot. The pilot has to keep in a log in the aircraft the signature, the place, the error, and the date of the VOR checks. We've covered these before. Everyone remembers this. But so when we talked about navigation systems, right? So you've got ground-based VOTs, so VOR test facilities. They have to be plus or minus 4 degrees. You've got ground-based VOR facility. That's where you're just using a VOR that exists and they've got a spot painted on the airfield. And you go and you have to dial it in to whatever the AFD tells you, what the chart supplement tells you, plus or minus 4. You've got airborne checks, which there's charted airborne checks. Those are plus or minus 6. You can make up your own airborne check. It has to be at least 20 nautical miles. I think Virgil actually talked about this. You have to be 20 miles away on a VOR, on an airway, over a prominent land-based landmark, plus or minus 6 degrees. Or if you have 2 VORs in the same aircraft, they can share the same antenna, but otherwise have to be completely separate systems. You can tune them both to the same VOR. You must be on an airway. I actually have to look that one up. But if you're on an airway, you can tune them to a VOR, and they have to be within 4 degrees of each other.
How do you log that you've checked these things?
You can literally write it on a 3x5 card and keep it in the plane.
Okay.
Anything that documents. A lot of people just have a little notepad in the plane and they write it in.
It's all the stuff that the pilot has to check.
So yeah, so on that AV8s,
Yeah.
that's the VOR check.
So in my aircraft, I have a binder, and one is for squawks, and one is just for logging the hobs and tack time and how much fuel and oil I put in, and one is my VOR checks. And I just write it in there. You put columns down there so you remember the things you have to write, and you just fill in the table, and the column header's already there. Makes it easy.
So, but a lot of people don't actually keep up with it, and if you do need to, if you want to use the VORs, so if you have a WAAS-enabled GPS, you don't legally have to have your VOR checks done if you're not going to use them as a primary mode of navigation. But if you want to have them backed up, all you got to do is take a 3x5 card.
Go to.
All right.
Sorry, my mom's not answering her phone. She would have to put the animals in. She might have slipped.
Okay. I have no concern with you taking care of your mom.
Okay, thank you. He's gonna verify.
All right. So, all right. Clearance and flight plan. You cannot fly IFR in controlled airspace unless you're on an IFR flight plan. You have to file the flight plan and you have to open the flight plan. You can, however, fly in class golf. If you have an IFR certificate, you can fly IFR in class golf without a flight plan. It is dumb as hell. You will die. You don't know how to cover that. All right. It's 18:30. Let's just take 10 minutes.
Should I grab water?
have a question about the NOTAM and that list, the part 9.
Northwest Craft?
103, yeah. There is a chance of NOTAMs popping up in flight, correct?
TFRs will pop up, yeah, which come out on an open, but yeah, it can happen.
Because we had a,
Mom, okay?
She's not answering her phone.
Okay.
Yep. And I won't be here tomorrow night either because the show's in pretty crap condition. So,
Okay.
yeah. Thanks for streaming. I was listening the whole time.
we had a airplane crash when I was flying out of Coeur d'Alene. We had an airplane crash to the ground loop on 220. And we were out flying at the time. Never heard anything about it on the radio. And it popped up on my phone, the new NOTAM that popped up on ForeFlight. And that's how we figured it out, that we were supposed to start flying 6 and 2-4.
We decided to take a break.
Okay, yeah.
Let's write that down.
So, we're gonna talk about alternate minimums, tonight, or does that come later in?
Talking about departure minimums, or?
No, but there's also, I thought some airports specified different
alternate,
minimums per chart.
I may have glossed past that as I was putting slides in. I was literally at the hospital with my wife this morning. She had surgery, so
Oh, bummer.
that's why I was finishing my slides.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to figure out in ForeFlight, where is the legend for approach charts? Like, I can find the legends for the VFR sectional and stuff, but I'm trying to figure out where their legend for, because that's, they have like the little T and the upside down A and the black triangle and stuff like that. And I'm trying to look up what they have to say about that. And I don't know. So it's Googleable.
Take care, man. Question I have for you. Actually, I kind of need some advice. Maybe both of you guys can help me out with this. How does a guy start flying right seat in a plane that's that's what I don't like. I'd like to get more experience flying. I'm not coming from an aviation background at all. I don't know anybody in the industry. I'm not comfortable on radios, flying into controlled airspace of any kind. I'm not very comfortable doing that. How do I get more experience, or how do I go about flying with guys? Finding guys that would let me ride seat with them. Because right now I have all the time in the world to do nothing.
To do nothing,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not working.
Well, you kind of come and hang out at the airport and start meeting people, and then finding out when they're just going on trips and those kinds of things. I never got a lot of free time, like while I was flying. I did do some like safety piloting for people. You got 3 guys here that are about to finish the private, and they're gonna roll right into doing instrument work. And then you guys start sharing and fly with each other, obviously, you and I are gonna start flying.
Another thing that's really helpful when you do cross countries, get flight following, because the calls you make and the things you do with ATC they're a subset. They're not the same as the Unscripted flight plan, but it's very similar. They're going to hand you off sector to sector. They're going to give you altimeter settings. And so it's a good way to get more familiar with the radio and talking to center and talking to approach as you fly through. So just always get flight following if you have a choice.
And the funny thing is that like the IFR radio work, what is hard won't be that hard because we're going to talk about it enough times. What you do 99% of the time is super easy. Because 99% of the time, all you're getting is handoffs. And so they call you and hand off, are you headed home?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. She usually would send a text right when she gets back in, so just in case.
All right. Hopefully everything's good.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I'll see you tomorrow.
All right.
Tomorrow.
Alright, see ya. Fun, everybody. Yeah.
All right. I guess we'll get started again. Since we're both here. All right.
Real quick, what makes a precision approach system precision compared to non-precision?
So it used to be super simple because it was the precision approach system had vertical guidance. But then when they made the first GPS systems that had vertical guidance, they didn't include those in precision approaches.
Okay.
And some of the new GPSs are as accurate as any ILS system.
Okay.
So, like I said, basically an instrument in an ILS, because it has a localizer and a glide slope, and a precision approach radar, PAR.
Okay.
So, it's in the title, precision. But other than that, everything else is a non-precision approach. So, VORs, GPS. I don't know if any of the other RNAVs are considered precision approaches.
Yep.
So,
ILS, is that the indicator inside the aircraft, that green and has a bar that goes up and down?
so your CDI that just has a bar like this, so that's your CDI.
And the ILS is the bar going horizontal.
Looks like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Which one is the bar that goes I think it's a glide slope indicator.
So this is your glide slope indicator. And then this is your course deviation indicator. All in your Omni head.
Okay.
But that glide slope indicator is also used with your GPS. And it can give you a glide slope with the GPS. The difference is, for some reason, the glide slope, again, I gotta go look this up. I'm 95% sure that a GPS-derived glide slope is still considered a non-precision approach. So, I could be wrong, so I have something to put in corrections next week. We'll go from there. All right, we already covered this. All right, takeoff and landing under IFR. All right. Approaches have to be in accordance with Part 97. So what that says is those approach plates, which we'll have classes on this in a couple weeks, I think about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we're going to talk about approach plates. All of those, each plate is actually a law. It's a graphical representation of the legal way to fly that approach. DA is your decision altitude. So on a precision approach, when you get to a certain altitude, that's when you execute your missed approach. DH is just the decision height. It's the height above the runway. DA and DH are directly related to each other. MDA is minimum descent altitude. So that's the lowest altitude you can descend to. But on a non-precision approach, you'll hit that altitude and then you'll still continue to fly level until you reach the missed approach point, which is a certain distance from the end of the runway. All right. Ducking under. So when you're at the MDA, it is illegal to descend below the MDA if you cannot see the things on this list here. You have to see the approach light system. And you see, I got this little note here that says 100-foot rule, seeing red. So you can descend another 100 feet below the MDA if you see the approach lights, but you can't go any lower until you see the red end lights or the red terminating bars, or any of the things on the other side of the threshold. So the threshold itself, threshold markings, threshold lights, runway end identifier lights, visual glide slope indicators, touchdown zone markings. So like the big white touchdown zone identifiers, and runway lights. Landing, you must have, in addition to being able to see these things at the altitude, you have to have enough forward visibility to meet the minimum forward visibility requirement on the plate. All right? It's very often like a half a mile visibility. Can be less, can be more. You have to know the missed approaches, be able to use those. Takeoff minimums. This one gets crazy. Part 121, Part 135, they have some pretty strict minimums. They won't take off unless they've got a certain ceiling and altitude. Part 91 does not apply to us. We can take off in 0-0. Now that's a horrible, horrible idea. You don't want to do that. You should take off in anything that is less than the minimums for any of the approaches into the airport you're departing from. So if you're at a VFR only airport, you shouldn't take off unless you have VFR minimums, in theory. Sometimes you can get around that by departing a VFR only airport. So like Ellerport, I will use the minimums at Coeur d'Alene, because if I had to, I could jump over and try to shoot into Coeur d'Alene. All right. So procedure turns. So the big thing is if the approach procedure requires a procedure turn, you have to do the procedure turn unless you are being vectored or you're on a course that specifically says no PT, no procedure turn. There are some courses, feeder courses that come in and don't want you to make a procedure turn. Right. And then ILS components. The note about ILS components is that, so here it tells you what all an ILS is made of. There's a chart that says if part of an ILS is not working, how much do you have to raise the minimums in order to continue coming in? Does that make sense? If the glide slope's not working, almost all ILS procedures are also a localizer procedure, and it will have a separate set of minimums for localizer only, but it goes from being a precision approach to a non-precision approach.
And it says that on the plates.
Yep. And we're going to have a whole class on reading plates. All right. Minimum altitudes. Minimum en route altitude and the minimum obstacle clearance altitude. Sometimes the MOCA can be lower than the MEA, but the problem with the MOCA is you might not get navigation. You might not be able to reach the VOR. So if you are using the VOR to navigate, you have to be at the MEA until you're within 22 miles. And then at 22 miles, your MOCA should give you navigation signal. Mountainous terrain, you got to be 2,000 feet above everything within 4 nautical miles of your course. While on IFR, non-mountainous, you have to be 1,000 feet above everything within 4 nautical miles of your course. And the weird one here is sometimes on the courses, if you're flying on a VOR, the MEA up to a point may be 9,000 feet, and then all of a sudden it's 13,000 feet at this one point. Well, unless it says that it's a minimum crossing altitude, an MCA, you don't start the climb until you get to that point, and then you immediately climb at least 500 feet per minute. Typically, you want to do 1,000 feet per minute or better, and you're going to climb up and get up to the new altitude. If there's a minimum crossing altitude, you have to get permission and climb before you get to the crossing point.
So you have to achieve that altitude before you
get there. Okay. All right. And a lot of this gets confusing because when you start filing modern now, we almost always fly using GPSs and we do a lot of point-to-point stuff. We're not even on a route. You know. But if you are on a named route, you need to know what the minimum altitudes are. All right, 91-183. While you're flying IFR, you have to be monitoring your radio. You must report the time and altitude passing each designated reporting point, or any reporting points you're told to report, except when you're under radar control, then you only have to report the points they specifically tell you to report. There's a whole list of mandatory reporting points. We'll talk about those in a different class. You also have to report unforecast weather, in particular if the unforecast weather is crappier than expected. And then anything that affects safety of flight. So like if somebody shines a laser at you, that's a required report. If you run into an unexpected airplane in the middle of an IFR flight, that's a required report. Two-way radio failure. Number one, Squawk 7600. Number two, in fact, I don't think it actually says Squawk 7600 in 91.185, but it does say if you're in VFR conditions or you encounter VFR conditions, you should continue in VFR and land. All right?
If you are an IFR and then any situation where it becomes VFR and you have to go to VFR,
Nope.
do you descend 500 feet?
Nope.
You don't, even if you're going to VFR, you still stay your
Well, if you're going to fly under VFR rules, then you go to
You
500.
descend 500 feet. Okay.
But if you're,
Descend or climb.
if your
Oh, yeah.
flight's up 24,000,
You can't do that because you have to be on an IFR flight plan.
So if there's any specific reason why you have to go VFR, then you would change your altitude to VFR altitudes.
Yeah. All right. So, and then if you can't get in VFR conditions and stay in VFR conditions, then you go IFR, and the rules are Avenue F and MEA. And so Avenue F is your route, MEA is your altitude.
See you.
Have a good one. All right. So your route, your direction, in order: the assigned direction, your vectored direction, your expected direction, and your filed direction. And the way to think about this is always, you have to get to the airport you were going to. So if your assigned direction is not going to get you there, then will the vector direction that they had you on, is that going to get you there? Probably not. But you may be on a vector until you can find your expected route, and then you get on your expected route, and then when the expected route goes away, and you're out of it, then you go to your filed route.
Okay.
All of the clearances they give you should connect up and make sense. So, all right. Altitude. You're going to fly at the highest of the minimum en route altitude, the expected altitude, or the assigned altitude. All right, so MEA is the route that's published on the route, minimum en route altitude. If they gave you an expected route that's higher, an altitude that's higher than the MEA, you go to that expected. Or if your assigned route altitude is higher than either of those, you go to that. And you just fly the highest of those three until you get to the end of your route, at which point you get ready to start your descent and come in and land. All right. So here we go. LOSCOM, what route do you fly? So 2132 Bravo, when reaching Kansas City VOR, expect Victor 16, direct DeForest VOR, Victor 562, direct Fortitrees VOR. So flying the route you've been given, so if you lose comm right off, you would just fly to Kansas City VOR. Let me grab this one. So if you're here and you lose comms, you fly to Kansas, then Victor, so that's what you were assigned, what you were told to do. Then this is what you were told to expect. All right. And then Fortress, there we go. VOR.
Why do they use expect V16? Why not?
Because they might give you something different.
Okay.
Before you get to Kansas City, they might give you something here. They might change it on you for some reason, for spacing or whatever. But they want to know what you think you're going to do in case you lose comms.
Yeah.
So like here, if you are being vectored and lose comm, then fly directly to Victor 16. So you just move over. At DeForest VOR, expect Victor 13. Badus VOR, Victor 176 Fortitude. Then you can lose comm, fly the route ATC says to expect in the further clearance. So then you go down here and then up here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that making any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, how often do you lose comms in a radio? Have you ever lost comms in a radio? Or in an airplane, sorry?
You will think you've lost comms almost every long flight. At some point they'll stop talking to you or something will happen. At some point you'll key a mic and you'll have trouble talking to them. Before you go to this full-on blown up thing, usually what you do is you just flip back to the last frequency you had, say, hey, I couldn't catch you. And they'll say, okay, hold on 10 minutes and then try again. Or they'll give you a different frequency to try. Lost comms is when you can't get back with them. So you always keep track of what frequency you were just on. And they give you a new frequency and you go, if you're what they're talking about is all your radios die. You know, I've never had it happen. It does happen, but it's pretty rare. And you've got a whole bunch of challenges going on if your radio's just completely crap to bed because you no longer have your GPSs. You no longer, you know.
Yeah.
So, all right. So 2132 Bravo, expect Victor 16, direct to Forest VOR, direct Fortress, direct K-BAM, climb and maintain 10,000 feet, expect 1,000 at Fortitrees VOR.
So I can imagine hearing that and remembering everything they said.
They always say it in kind of the same order. You'll write down craft.
Oh yeah.
So Clarence, route. That's all route.
Yeah.
And then altitude.
Okay.
So here, this airplane loses come and maintains its last assigned altitude, which is 10,000 feet. At DeForest, the airplane climbed to 12,000. So let's see. So we're 10,000 feet. Maintain 107,000 feet. Expect 11,000 feet at DeForest. Okay. So at DeForest, you would have climbed up to 11,000 feet, but the MEA is 12,000, so you go to 12,000. At Fortitrees, the airplane descends to and maintains 11,000 because the MEA is only 6,000 now,
But you're assigned up to.
but your expect was 11,000.
Oh, expect 1,000.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess the fastest way to remember all their stuff would be to have a map out. And when they say direct, you just draw a line through the VORs instead of writing it all down.
That just, you figure out, usually you just write down all of the routing information. And nowadays, it's very rarely VORs, it's a bunch of GPS locations. Waypoints, yep. Okay, and then when should you fly the approach? So, cleared to Mondo intersection via 16, blah, blah, blah. With lost common airplane should proceed with the initial approach to the initial approach fix and hold until 1330. Expect further clearance time. All right, so expect further clearance at 1330, time now 1305. This is important that you write down if they give you an expect further clearance time. All right, and then confirm that you have the same time. That time will always be in UTC. So you would fly to and you'd hold right here until 1330 Zulu, and then you would shoot the approach.
Is your watch in UTC or military?
Both.
Oh, you got both.
I have two on.
That's nice.
So, and my UTC is also, it's military UTC. I do everything on a 24-hour clock.
Oh, okay.
So, all right. So lost comm scenario number 2. So no EFC time given, then you would fly to here and you would hold until your ETA, you take the time en route and add it to what time you actually departed to get your estimated time of arrival. And then you would depart Mondo, the initial approach fix, at that time. So if you were expected to spend 13 minutes 45 seconds. Oh, that's a time. If your ETA was 13:45 based off of your flight plan, now remember that's the ETE added to the time that you actually departed, not your planned, because your planned departure can be within 2.5 hours of when you actually took off. All right. Cleared to Velda intersection, Victor 116. Expect further clearance at 1330 time now. So you got cleared to Velda. You'd hold at Velda till 1330, and then you'd go to the initial approach fix. They didn't give you an estimated time there, so then you're back to your flight plan time, no earlier than 13:45. If you get there later, you just immediately proceed in.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds wild.
That all seems just
Too
scary.
Yeah. I
You
agree.
just estimate your time and gamble on the approach and head in.
Well, what actually happens is they clear everything,
Okay.
and unless your transponders completely kick the bucket, they can probably see you on radar anyway, so they know what you're doing. The goal is they want to know where you're going to go, where you're going to hold, and what time you're going to try to come in.
So your transponder and your communication radios are not connected really. Just by the electrical system.
They both get power from the same, probably from the same bus.
Okay.
So if your avionics bus goes out, you could lose both of them.
Okay, that makes sense.
But they still have primary radar on you.
Yeah.
So, all right, 21205, A tomato flames. Yeah, A tomato flames and flaps is the VFR. So you have to have all the VFR stuff, plus the flap stuff if you're flying at night, and then you need grab card.
Rad card.
Generator, alternator, radios, both common and that. Altimeter, ball, clock. The clock has to have a sweep second hand or a digital second counter. And it must be installed in the aircraft. It can't be, like, you can't bring a clock and tape it to the dash.
You need flaps even during the day.
Attitude.
It's still IFR, right?
I always thought you had to have flaps for flying during the day. I have read something recently that makes me think technically you don't have to have all of those, but you're going to have all of those to fly in IFR conditions anyway. Because you're going to have fuses, landing lights, anti-collision lights, position lights, and a source of power. Oh, that's power, not poser. But because look, generator, source of power. All right. And then if you're flying in crappy weather, you're going to have lights. Because if you have an electrical system, you have to have lights.
Yep.
Make sense?
Fair enough.
So, but the rig does not specifically say you have to have flaps,
Really?
except you have to have it at night.
Okay.
So you can do a big deep dive in 21205 if you want. I don't think that's a question that you would ever see that specific. Okay, inoperative equipment. So the minimum equipment list, this comes up quite a bit. People always say this, that the minimum equipment list is the minimum equipment you have to have to fly. It's not.
Yeah.
What is it?
See, minimum allowable equipment that can be broken.
Yeah, it's specifically what things can be in the airplane that don't work and you can still fly. And that is specific to an airplane. In fact, you end up with what's basically an STC that says that you can fly the airplane with these items broken. All right? What you will end up looking at is 91205. So do you have tomato flames, flaps, grab card? And then the equipment list for your airplane, which is not the MEL. The equipment list for your airplane will have required equipment. And if it's on that required equipment list, you have to have it because the manufacturer said you had to have it.
So along with automated flaps, grab card, and your equipment list, everything that's not on those can be broken.
Yes. All right. You guys know the supplemental oxygen rules?
I think so. So 12,500, you need oxygen if you're going to be up there for more than 30 minutes. 14,500, you need oxygen for your crew. And then if you're at 15,000 or higher, you need oxygen for your crew and passengers. But your passengers don't have to use it.
Almost 100% correct. It's 14,000 even. So 12.5 to 14,000. You can go 30 minutes without oxygen, without supplemental oxygen, and then crew must use it. Above 14,000, pilot and crew must use oxygen at all times. And then above 15,000, the passengers must be provided with oxygen. I don't know why you should.
I know.
You're required.
Oh, okay.
Okay? All right, transponder and altitude reporting
But
equipment.
the passengers don't have to. Don't have
Nope.
to use it.
You have to provide it, though.
Yeah, okay.
You have to provide it. They don't have to use it.
Gotcha.
How are we doing here? Oh, we're doing all right. I think we only got 6 slides left, guys. All right, so ATC transponder and altitude reporting requirement. Now, see if I can explain this in a way that makes it simple. All right. So you do not have to have a transponder in class G, E, or D? Mom okay?
Yeah, she answered the phone
Awesome.
after like I was halfway home.
It's okay. Your mom's okay then. So that's what's important. All right, so you do not have to have a transponder in class G, so uncontrolled. You do not have to have it in class E below 10,000. Class G above 10,000, you do have to have that. There's some weird exceptions to that. And then class D, you are not technically required to have a transponder. All right? Class C, in the class C and above the class C, up to 10,000 feet, you have to have a transponder with mode C. Class B has a veil around it. It's about 30-mile radius. You have to have a transponder everywhere inside that veil. Okay?
I like that depiction.
Yeah, it's
I've never
nice.
seen it that way.
That's way better.
It's in your book.
Yeah.
Okay? So, it's in the Rod Machado book. So, at 10,000 feet and above, you always have to have a transponder, except if you're within 2,500 feet above the ground,
Oh.
then you don't have to have it.
Then why is the green not in the class G above 10,000 on the right side?
Right there,
The right below, because that's 14,000.
14,000 foot. I don't actually know what that line's for.
Okay.
So,
Is that the highest class G?
no, everything above 14.5 is class E. You are correct. So, and everything, so you have to have a transponder above 10,000 feet no matter what, except within 2,500 feet of the ground. All right? Class A, you have to have, so everything above 10,000 feet except for 2,000 feet AGL. Everything inside the mode C veil to include under the shelf. Okay? And then class C and above, you do not have to have it below the class C shelf. You don't have to have it in class G or E or D. Nope. My laser pointer died.
What batteries?
No, it's USB. Oh, look, and now it's working again. It's USB rechargeable.
Oh, nice.
That's cool.
So,
Gotta get one of those.
okay. So again, as long as you can remember, inside and above the C, inside the veil, above 10K, except within 2,500 feet. That's the rule, right? So that's mode C. Guess what? It's actually the same for ADSB out.
Oh, that's nice.
Everywhere you need mode C, you need ADSB out. This is just a different depiction of the same thing. Big thing is you can fly under the class C shelf without ADSB out.
But no.
You can fly into D, E, and Gulf. You have to have it above 10,000 feet. So same place. It's all the same place.
Sorry, so that last one, class G above 10,000, you need the transponder.
There is no class G above 10,000. Well,
It showed it in the last slide there.
That's what I was.
yeah, but you still, just like you have to have an altimeter with mode C, you have everybody above class 10,000 feet,
Okay.
except within 2,500 feet of the ground.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's at 10,000.
Yep. So, everywhere you need a mode C, you have to have ADSB out now. So, find a charger for that because I just think it's dying. I have one. I just have to dig it. Should say I need to dig it out. All right. Oh, I say now we're on to NTSB. So you will notice that you have some FAR stuff that's not Part 14. All right. So NTSB 830.5 immediate notification. So there's a list of things that you have to immediately notify. You might get one question about this on a written test. Oh, I thought I had it in my wallet. I used to have a card that.
Oh, this stuff.
Is that your passport?
Yeah.
Nice.
So I used to have a card in my wallet that was what to do in the case of an accident. Kind of like, so the stuff that's on your kneeboard is all the stuff like lost comms procedures should be on your kneeboard. Those things that you have to do, you're not going to have time to look it up on your kneeboard. NTSB, you don't need it on your kneeboard, but you need it handy. You have it on your iPad. What you would actually do is go, do I meet the criteria in 83.5 for immediate notification? Immediate means as quickly as you can after you deal with putting out the fires and that kind of thing.
Which one is 10 days? That says immediate.
We'll get there in a minute. So, but flight control malfunction or failure have to be reported. So if your aileron stopped working, you have to report it. If a flight crew member becomes incapacitated, you have to report it. Internal turbine engine component. Well, if you're not flying a turbine, that doesn't apply to you. In-flight fire. Fires on the ground don't have to be reported, but if you have an in-flight fire, it must. Aircraft collision in flight. If two planes run into each other on the ground, it does not necessarily have to be reported. Damage other than an aircraft of more than $25,000. I don't know many airplanes that you could do less than $25,000. Oh, anyway. If it's a large multi-engine airplane of over 12,500 pounds, there's a list of specific requirements. I didn't put it on the slide because we're not there. If a propeller blade is damaged or departs the aircraft, excluding a ground strike, it has to be reported. If your electronic systems lose information, and it actually says total loss of information except for a flicker, has to be reported. ACAS resolution. If helicopter blades are damaged, period, it has to be reported. In flight or on the ground, even if it's ground contact. So, and that's both the main road and the tail road.
Is that because there's not taxiing procedures for helicopters?
There are taxiing procedures for helicopters. They air taxi them. They hover taxi. What's that?
Do they have to be in flight though, or is that not considered flight?
Well, if it's sitting on the ground and the rotor blade is turning and somebody drives a fuel truck and it tips, actually, even if it's not turning, if a fuel truck hits the rotor blade on a helicopter, it has to be reported. Because they will just fly apart.
Yeah.
So,
It is on it. It's actually.
air carriers have specific rules, and then if an aircraft is overdue and believed to be in an accident. All right. So that's immediate notification. Again, if you have something that happens and you're going, I wonder if that's an immediate notification. It's in every FAR AIM. Pull it up, read through the list, and there's more details than what I put on the slide. All right. Preservation of aircraft wreckage, mail, program records. All right. And the bottom line here is you preserve everything except if you need to remove people from the aircraft, you can do damage to the aircraft. All right? If you need to, they don't want you to move the aircraft unless you need to move it to protect the aircraft so they can do their investigation, which typically you end up having to move it anyway because you have to protect the public. You can't sit where it is very often. So if it crashes on an airport, it's going to get moved.
Yeah.
If it crashes out in the woods, they'll tell you when you can move it. When I crashed into a lake, the EPA told us it had to be moved immediately. And so the sheriff's department supervisor moved. But, so there you go. You should take pictures and sketches. NTSB wants you to do it for the investigation. You should do it for the insurance company. But just nowadays, bust out a phone, take 1,000 pictures, and then off you go. All right?
Into the evidence locker.
Yep. So, and then you are legally required to retain all records pertaining to the accident, to include any email, mail, any correspondence, any voicemails that pertain to it. You are not allowed to destroy them until the NTSB tells you to control them.
What if you already destroyed them?
Then you're in trouble.
So if you get an email 3 years ago about a maintenance thing, and you trash that, and you
In theory.
And then you wreck the airplane 3 years later.
No. Pertaining to the accident.
Okay.
So, now you are not allowed to just destroy. There's a whole list of rules about what maintenance records you are required to keep. What maintenance records are required to be transferred to new owners. And most people have far more records than they're required to keep because they just don't throw anything away. All right. Reports and statements to be filed. You have to file a report within 10 days if the NTSB asks you to. And that's what 10 days at the request of the NTSB. There's actually a whole bunch of weird language in there, and like it says that it has to be filed with the NTSB. I know from experience that sometimes you don't file with the NTSB, you file with the FAA. They will tell you. The NTSB will say, we're not investigating this, the FAA is going to investigate this. So you'll file with them. And big one is crew members must be prepared to make statements and should make statements as soon as possible after the accident. They want it to be as fresh as possible. Ta-da.
Was that it?
That was it.
Look at that. We're 45 minutes early tonight.
Pretty impressed.
So, kind of the bigger thing is, and I just realized last night too that I'm way behind on posting slides. When I post the slides up, when you're looking at the slides, you should open up the writing and read it. You should be in a position right now to understand what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
We think we understand because we read it in the book and we see it online, see it in a slide, and I stand up here and talk about something. Go and read the regulation for each of these things so that you can see if you understand how the FAA worded that. And then don't take anybody's word for things. I go back to the Northwest Craft thing. Yeah, all the rest of the things for Northwest Craft are in that section of the FAR. But nowhere does that one tell you have to read the NOTAMs. That's in a different regulation. So go check that kind of stuff out for yourself. And I told you. All right.
The other thing I'd like to add to that is read them in their entirety. Because I have looked stuff up before and started questioning what I was reading and got all worked up about it. And then as I read further, I realized that it did say what I thought, what I understood.
Yeah, there's a lot of accepts or, and then as well as, all right. So let's see if I can do this. For those of you on the stream, I apologize. You will not be able to see what I'm about to post.
Is anybody watching?
I don't know. Mira was watching earlier. So.
I was. I was listening.
Yeah, listening.
I was kind of.
I'm like a podcast, huh?
Yeah, kind of like a podcast, but a podcast keeps dropping in and out.
Oh, really?
The audio. Well, I was in the middle.
Oh, because I walk around?
No, it's not because of you. It's because I was walking around trying to fix kids with their stupid microphones that they kept breaking.
Okay. So.
I forgot to get flyers.
So Gold Seal does really good online training. This is a list of things they have with the instrument regulations. Part 1, the pilot. And then I told you that the order that they come in numerically is not the best way to look at them. This is a 4-page document, or this is a 2-page document that kind of covers all the requirements for being a legal IFR pilot. All right? Then they have one. No, so this is part 3, but this is flight planning. What do you legally have to do for flight planning?
That's cool. Or is it a little free or is this paid?
So this is paid. I'm going to see if I get enough time, I will redo something similar for us. What I would say is, if you look at things like this, though, So here's the plan. Aviate, part 1. 91,409, 91,171, 91,409, 91,411. They break it down where all of these acronyms came from, and then they're grouped in ways that make sense topically. So, all right. We're going to end the stream right there.